Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me, Joe. It's as we just said, 7:30 a.m. my time. What is it where you are? You're in Pittsburgh?
Pittsburgh, 3:30 p.m.
Wonderful. You're at your
So,
office. You've got some medals there in the background.
yeah. My some trophies and things. Keeps reminding me when I was young.
Well, you seem to stay young, mate.
Uh,
Just really appreciate not only the availability of your time now, but just everything that you've contributed to support me over a number of years since we first came into each other's lives. So you're, just so everyone understands who you are, you're a neurosurgeon and a pioneering one at that, and expert in anti-aging, longevity strategies. You're an athlete, and you're involved with some sports teams, the Pittsburgh Steelers as the team neurosurgeon, and you're also medical director of WWE, which is pretty cool. Are you still carry that role?
I'm a consultant to both now, the Steelers and the WWE. I was the team doctor for the Steelers for 35, 40 years, and WWE for 15 years, medical director.
But so in your mid 80s, you're deciding to wind down now.
I'm actually busier now than I ever have been, doing some very fun things, Dean. Very fun things.
It seems that way online, and you're being honored a lot for your contributions, and
Some
you've
some good things are happening.
been busy a long time. So you and I, we came to know each other in the context of wine, interestingly enough. So everyone, I have thewinedoctor.com.au, a wine where we've elevated the polyphenol antioxidant content substantially. It's the first full strength enhanced wine of its kind in the world, Australian patented technology by Dr. Philip Norrie here in Sydney. He's a wine and medical historian. And I was interested in bringing this product to the United States. And so I'm not a wine business guy, but understand a little bit of science, and just Googling resveratrol and can't remember and professor. I was trying to find the right person to work with, and there you were on the internet, having published the book called The Longevity Factor: How Resveratrol and Red Wine Activate Genes for a Long and Healthy Life. I think that's the title of your book.
That is the title, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So we got talking, and then you introduced me to your cousin Paul, who owned a
Correct.
winery in Napa, and I was privileged to spend some time with Paul in Napa, California, on his beautiful estate there. It was just such a magical experience, and I was there for a couple of nights, 3 days maybe, I think it was, and we didn't talk business at all until the very end. We just had a blast. He was just hilarious, told some amazing jokes and life stories, and towards the end said, Dean, we love you. Consider yourself family. Would you like me to order a container? And that's how we got the wine into the United States. Unfortunately, your cousin was then diagnosed with advanced stage renal cancer, and he lost his life to that not long after. So but a blessing was that we got to know each other. And
Yeah, very good man.
yeah, yeah. And then you contributed to Phil Norrie's Wine and Health book. Asked you to
Correct.
contribute the chapter on resveratrol, which you did very generously. And that's excerpt of that is available off the winedoctor.com.au website as well. So, thank you so much for doing that. That
Yeah, no, Bill's done an amazing job. What a knowledge base he has.
He is. Well, he's a historian, so he loves to tell stories
Yeah.
of everything many centuries ago. It's it's great. It's great to have him and yourself in my life. Now, something I'm really interested in. You wrote a book more recently called Square One. Square One detailed your life, and I really resonated because I read it around the time, I don't know, I was about 40 years old, and I got recreated given what you were dealing with, which you detail in that book around that similar age. You lost your father, your life seemed to bottom out, and you were able to pick yourself back up. I recommend, if people have an opportunity, get Joe's book, Square One, give it a read. I promise you it'll contribute enormously to your life. But tell me, the phenomenon burnout, and if we go back to when you were 41, what happened and how did you pick yourself back up?
Well, as you mentioned, my father died prematurely at age 60, and my wife and I separated. She left with our two kids, and I had to quit neurosurgery all the same week. All this happened within a week, and my father bequeathed to my mother an old, dilapidated, heavily mortgaged truck stop in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I couldn't operate because of the stress and depression, actually. And I literally moved in with my mother and flipped hamburgers and filled up 18 wheelers in a truck stop from being chief of neurosurgery at a major medical center. The next week, I'm working in a truck stop, wondering, but that's all I was capable of doing. I wasn't capable of doing much else. And one day, the banker, after several months, the banker called me and said, "Joe, we need to go for a run." And I said, "Run? I'm 20 pounds overweight. I have a hard time walking up a flight of steps." I think he wanted to see if I'd be around long enough to pay off the mortgage on the truck stop. But anyway, we made it around the track 4 times, and I said, "Never again." I was exhausted, hurt, out of wind. But that night, something very strange happened. I slept for the first time in months. So I went down the next day and I did a mile and a quarter, then a mile and a half, 2, 3, 4. And I read about triathlons at that time, cross trained. And so I got a bike and I learned to swim. And I started alternating, saving my knees and my alternative training. And concurrently, I was, without realizing it, rebooting my neurotransmitters, my serotonin, my dopamine, my endocannabinoids, acetylcholine, all elevated. My brain started to work again, and I lost weight as the unintended side effect of doing the right thing. And I was getting back into a homeostatic balance, if you would, both mentally and physically. So what I discovered unintentionally was, we know the mind can make the body very sick: heart attacks, strokes, ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome. But the body can heal the mind. And what I was doing with aerobic activity, I was rebooting my brain and healing the mind with the neurotransmitters, and also the mitochondria were working better. And there's a molecule called BDNF, brain derived neurotropic factor, which gets elevated with aerobic activity, and it creates new brain cells, new synaptic connections, and also enhances neuroplasticity. So again, like Viktor Frankl said in his book, and Man's Search for Reason, says, as the unintended side effect of doing the right thing, uh, you can regain balance and health in your brain and body. So that's kind of my story. And I was able to come back in my mid 40s, and 40 years later, uh, I've been very blessed to be able to make significant contributions and help a lot of people.
So what happens though, Joe, to the brain? So when seemingly life just falls apart, there's the experience of the rug being pulled out from under you. It almost seems to happen in a very short period of time, but you know, in hindsight, you look back and there were signs and lacks of integrity that maybe weren't handled leading up to the downfall. What happens to the brain when you're dealing with all of that, that you would be in a state of disarray from which you can then rebuild? But what happened to the brain to kind of have it go that way?
Well, what happens is it's called stress. And what does stress do to the brain? Stress is neurotoxic to the brain. Excess cortisol and adrenaline, epinephrine that gets secreted by your adrenal glands and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis causes an elevation of hormones and neurotransmitters that are life preserving if we're on the savannah in Africa and we have to escape a man eating lion. Uh, but it's a peak and it's survival, fight or flight. When that fight or flight, though, continues unabated for extended periods of time, those same hormones, instead of being life saving, become killers. They kill cells in your brain, they kill cells in the endothelial lining of your blood vessels, they lead to strokes, heart attacks, Alzheimer's disease, and a host of other, in quotes, diseases of aging. So uh, that's what happens. That's why when I was working so feverishly for approbation and validation, which is what I was doing, and ignoring important things like my family and others, I did not follow the Buddhist admonition of being mindful and being aware of what I was doing. I was too busy doing other things for the wrong reason. Uh, there's a book entitled The Second Mountain. It's a very good book. And the first mountain we climb when we're young and full of vigor and ambition, the search for, as I said, approbation, validation, money, position, power, prestige. And then you come to a cataclysmic event or a life quake, and you realize, hey, maybe those things aren't that important. And then, if you're lucky, like I was, you're able to climb a second mountain. And what's the second mountain? The second mountain is about giving back. It's about reaching out to others. It's about doing the right thing and treating your body better, treating your family better, and reaching out to friends and colleagues.
That's beautiful. Thanks for not only doing whatever it took to go through that journey, but sharing that with the world. Um, I was 40 when I received a phone call. I was at a leadership weekend down in Melbourne, Victoria. And during the lunch break on the Sunday, I checked some messages on my phone, and there are a number of missed calls from a particular number. I rang it back. It was the Bendigo Base Hospital. Bendigo is the town in which I grew up. And I rang and I managed to speak to the doctor there, and she shared with me what had just happened to my mother. And my mom had had a hemorrhagic stroke. And by the time she arrived at the hospital, the blood had filled half of her brain and it was into her brain stem. And, there was this, I tell you what was fascinating. I was in a leadership training weekend and I spoke to my coach. It was a big uh, Aussie guy, speaks in a very deep voice like this. And he asked me one question when I told him what had happened. He said, Dean, are you complete with your mother? It was one of those questions. It's like, wow, I had to deal with myself in that moment. What am I going to say? And I said, yes, I am complete with mum. And he said, okay, got it. Here's what's going to happen. Electrical activity in her brain will slow down and eventually stop. Shortly after, so will her heart. She'll take her final breath, and that'll be it. And there's nothing to be afraid of.
Wow. Heavy.
Yeah. And I got on a train. It's about 2 hours from where I was on the train, and I rang you. I don't know if you recall, and I shared with you what happened. And you said to me, Dean, same thing happened to my mother. If she's
Yep.
still alive when you get there, hold her hand, tell her you love her. And that made the biggest difference. Those two conversations made the biggest difference for me in just being able to accept what's so, without any interpretation. There's something wrong here. It shouldn't be this way. It was just, okay, got it. This is what's happening right now. And there's nothing else happening right now than what's happening right now. And I was able to just be with it all. So, really, that will stay with me for the rest of my days. And I really want to thank you and honor you for that contribution. As maybe small as it was the biggest deal for me to have that conversation. And the fact that you were available to me, you took that call. That was huge for me. Really appreciate it, Joe.
Didn't realize that. There's another good book about transitions by a fellow by the name of Bruce Feiler, and he interviewed several hundred people in great detail, taking very detailed histories about their lives. And one of the conclusions that he had when he went through the life story of several hundred people was that everyone has at some point in their life 2 to 3 different life quakes. I describe my life quake, you describe your life quake. And what he stated was this is a usually an unexpected cataclysmic event that leads to a major emotional disturbance that can last a year or 2 years to get over: loss of a child, a divorce, loss of a parent. But you can't get out of this life without having at least 2 or 3 of those at some point. And adversity sometimes is the best teacher. We never choose it, but it's going to happen. So uh, I, after doing some real heavy training for some triathlons in Hawaii that I did, I sat down one day and I concluded the 3 most important things in life. So, Dean, I'm going to rhetorically ask you, and then I'll answer.
Oh, okay.
3 most important things in life.
Hmm.
One, mental and physical health. Number one. Can't, without that, we're in shallows and in misery. Number two is relationships, relationships with God, family, friends, and colleagues. Number three is carpe diem, seize the day.
Hmm.
So we know not the hour nor the day. I'm sitting here in Pittsburgh, you're in Australia, but I see the bullets going by. I'm an octogenarian. I've lost a lot of friends to
Hmm.
everything, you name it: strokes, heart attacks, cancer. So, the one thing we can do is seize the day and make the most of it, having a conversation like we're having continents away.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody will listen to it. Maybe it'll touch somebody.
Hmm.
But if it does, fine. If it doesn't, so be it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I tell you, it sounds like it was the same with you, but for me, my marriage ending, my mother passing away, there were a number of things that happened seemingly all in a very short space of time and had an effect where basically it was like a complete bottoming out.
Yeah.
But I noticed I was still standing. I was still there. And I thought, okay, can it get any worse? Right. And I thought, if this is as bad as it gets, and it hurts and it sucks and it's a real struggle, but I was still there and I was still standing, and maybe that was enough for me to just keep going. And I got to tell you that my mother's funeral, her passing was quite a transformational experience, because I realized at her funeral that my whole life, just before I was about to step up to deliver the eulogy, it was like time stopped. And I realized in that moment, as I looked at the coffin, oh, mum's in the box. I don't have to speak to make her proud anymore, right? What does she care? She's in the box, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, what can I say? And I got to tell you, this was the most profound bit, because the immediate thought was I could just speak to honor her life. But then I thought again, what does she care? She's in the box. Honor people when they're alive, right? And so then I looked out, this whole concept, you and your life. And I looked out at all the people at the funeral, and I went, oh my gosh, that's my mother's life. Your life is constituted by the people in your life. And I just spoke to them as and the experience was like speaking to my mother via the people in her life. That's her life. And I let go of this whole context of trying to make mum proud. Now, who would try so hard to make their mother proud is someone who is for himself, someone that doesn't make her proud. Now I've got to try and make her proud. And all, that was my whole life was about. I got to tell you, it was so liberating, Joe. It was like, wow, I could just let that go. And then the adventure of this life now, like, what could I create? What could I get up to? And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, you didn't stop being a neurosurgeon. You were like what, top of your game just before you bottomed out. You were innovative. You right back in the 60s, you were developing ultrasound technologies and approaches in surgery. I mean, you were highly accomplished. You didn't throw all of that out. Did you have any fantasies about maybe doing something different?
Well, it's literally saved my life. I was talking to a friend actually this morning who had some very traumatic marital experiences over the past year. And it was his work that saved him and enabled to reconstitute the relationship in a marriage. When I had nothing left but my work and I actually was able to get back after the truck stop, it was the neurosurgery that saved my life in terms of having a structure, having something to do, giving back and getting the rewards that come from that. So I was fortunate to have that and then able to add upon it and do a whole lot of more good things.
Yeah, that structure I think is important. Otherwise, you can find yourself when your reserves aren't so full, it's very easy to just become a leaf in the wind. And to have some kind of structure makes an enormous difference. And so one of the things that I created, and you've been prolific throughout your career, decade after decade, as you said, you're in your 80s and still competing in athletic endeavors, which is extraordinary. I developed and it was really, I refined it at the beginning of the pandemic. 2020, my original training was in the area of emerging infectious diseases as a molecular virologist. And then I had some experience and some expertise in what it takes to reverse metabolic syndrome. So it kind of seemed to me at that time that those two areas of interest and expertise maybe could have some relevance to a few people. So I started helping more and more people restore metabolic health, within a structure that I developed. And I refined that structure, and I remember scribbling some stuff down on a piece of paper because I was struggling. How do I communicate 15, 20 years of, you know, uh, bits and pieces that I've put together over the years to doctors so they understand what I'm getting at very succinctly and quickly. And I just drew a structure. and I sent it to you, and you responded, who put this together? I honestly, when I saw that message, I thought I'd screwed up. It felt like I was in trouble, like the teacher was telling me off. And I rang you and you said, Dean, this is brilliant. You've covered everything, the gut, the brain, the metabolic system. So that was very, very validating. And that's all I needed to hear. And I just ran with it 100%. And this structure is a structure that we utilize within the Simplr Health protocol, where it's an adaptive reprogramming. And I come from the view that the biological systems are quite flexible, and if you give it an environmental challenge and sustain that challenge long enough, the body adapts. And you just got to remain committed in there. And so there's the structure, and then there's the health coach, and the health coach gives the space in which someone can transform their life. Who's been your coach? Who have been those people that you would have considered created the space for you to be able to deal with yourself and your life in the way that you had to?
First of all, of course, my parents, and they were obviously incredibly influential and supportive, and it really gave me a huge awareness of the importance of environment in growing up. Kids, as you mentioned, I work with the Steelers, and I work with a lot of athletic teams, and so many, particularly professional athletes, come from single homes, single
Right.
moms. Usually the mother, the father found other interests or whatever, and they grow up in single homes, and sports has become an outlet for them, literally a salvation for them. And on the contrary, those young boys and young girls who grow up without a structured life uh, have incredible difficulty, and in succeed, in quotes, succeeding, and can get waylaid by drugs and a whole lot of other bad things, pregnancy at 15 or 14, and a whole lot of things. So the initial so-called epigenetic factors, uh, and and then the teachers that I've had. Had 12 years of Sisters of Charity uh, as a grade school and high school. Very rigid, very strict, very boundary, and too many kids now really don't have the boundaries that uh, I had or we had. And with social media, it can be toxic and very fast paced. Where are we living now? I attended a meeting yesterday, 2 days ago, on AI. There were 100 of the brightest people in the country here at the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon talking about artificial intelligence and where we're going, where we are, and where we're going with avatars and robotics. And, we're going to have, if we're not already there, there was an engineer from NVIDIA who spoke, the chip maker. He said, we have avatars now that you cannot distinguish from a human being in terms of the conversation as well. So, think about it. You can download PubMed into an avatar.
Wow.
So, in medicine, there was a fellow, Dr. William Osler, who started the Johns Hopkins Medical Center, Medical Department of Medicine, 1895 or so. He said, if you listen to a patient carefully enough, they'll tell you the diagnosis 80 to 90% of the time. The history, if you really listen and put it together, can really tell you the disease process.
Hmm.
So now you take an avatar who can converse just like you and I are and download all of the information in PubMed while we're discussing this. You know, what kind, they probably can do much better than physicians. They will in diagnostic possibilities
Yes.
going forward.
Yeah. That's
Can't
extraordinary.
you know how it's evolving so quickly. Immunotherapy of cancer and the various protocols in around the world treating, pick a cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic. What is the latest and the best protocol to do this or that? What doctor? I mean, you can't assimilate all of the information that's available,
Hmm.
but you can go to Chat GP 2, 4, or 5 and ask the question, and it's a good start.
Exactly. I've just been playing.
So,
ChatGPT has been amazing of late for me. I've always had, it's been a challenge for me to write, and I write well, but it takes everything for me to do it, and it takes me a long time. But ChatGPT has just revolutionized that, and the more I use it, the more it just holds on to everything I put in there, and I'm very, very careful of what I put in, right, to make sure that I always get good stuff back out. And it's just been serving me really, really well, um, bringing all of these ideas and articulating it in a way that I would never have done, and that makes it possible for others to read as well, the continuity of those thoughts and ideas. AI is one thing. What else are you excited about in terms of the future of medicine? What's been kind of floating your boat, rubbing your Buddha of late?
well, I'm since I stopped operating a few years back, I'm working on some very exciting projects. Very exciting. I'm working with the former head or director of the Indian National Brain Institute, who now is my colleague here at the University of Pittsburgh. And we've demonstrated in patients with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, there's a marked deficiency of glutathione in the brain, uh, non-invasively. So the question is, what can we do about that? So we're working on various proposals and projects to grant requests. Everything takes, IRBs and money and all that stuff to do it. But we believe we're onto something very substantial there.
How do you measure glutathione levels in the brain?
With the MR spectroscopy, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, it's a special algorithm and design. Instead of getting a picture of the brain, you're able to measure the metabolites in the brain, like glutathione, uh, glutamate, glutamine, acetylaspartate, creatine. So you can measure these amounts in the brain uh, and correlate it with clinical pictures, and that's all non-invasive. So it's an MRI, a special type of MR that does spectroscopic imaging of the brain.
Yeah.
That's very, very exciting.
So I'm now working with Professor Wallace Bridge and his business
Yes.
partner, Wallace Bridge, Professor Wallace Bridge, who developed and invented glycine, right?
You're working with him?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Joe, I see you take the product. So, and then another
He's
friend
the
of
one
mine,
that introduced me. He's the one that introduced me to Dr. Mandel in India.
is that right? Oh, there you go. Wow.
So what are you doing with Wallace?
I'm just helping them. Look, they developed the manufacturing plant for the glycine supplement marketed as Continual G in Houston, Texas, and they've asked me to assist in opening up some sales channels. Let's move some products because I had all these other ideas of how we could deliver that product and new formulations and what it could be paired with. And they said, Dean, can you help us open up some new sales channels so we've got some revenue to continue to invest in the development of new products and different iterations of it? So, that's why I asked you about maybe how can we push through this through the A4M network, etc. But that product has been demonstrated. So from my understanding of it, taken orally, it can significantly increase the intracellular concentrations of glutathione in lymphocytes. But have you looked at how to increase glutathione levels in the brain?
Well, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
That's
That's
what we want.
undergoing now, that research. Yeah,
That's what we want to
underway.
be.
Well,
It's
that'll be
incredible.
fun.
Where are you located in Australia?
I'm in Sydney. Yeah.
He's at the University of New South Wales, or he was.
Is it maybe, yeah, maybe either there or Macquarie. I can't remember. Yeah,
Anyway,
one
the
of
work
those.
they've done, and Martin Sarkis, I think, is the other fellow. But they've done really incredible work to get this stuff to market.
Yeah. Yeah, so my other friend, Pat Cash, the Australian tennis player, he won Wimbledon in 1987. Um, and it's interesting to be friends with him now as well, because when I was a young tennis player, I idolized him and modeled my serve on his serve, which wasn't good for my back at all. And I told him that. And he said, Dean, it wasn't good for my back at all either. I modeled Boris Becker. So, it's funny. But these emerging products, if you know, if you look at the supplement market now, the barriers to entry seem to be becoming lower and lower, and the market is just flooded with all these various products. People struggle to make sense of it all. They waste thousands of dollars on pointless supplements that just sit in oftentimes people's pantry and they never take them anyway because it's not within a structure. I love that has come up in this conversation. Structure is so important. But as a guide, you're the senior vice president of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. You're in your 80s, you still compete in triathlons and Ironman competitions, if you still do. To me, I think you do. But what would you say are from your knowledge, the critical supplements or most important ones that people ought to be taking?
Well, I'm a big proponent of omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil. Uh, I think curcumin is a terrific natural antioxidant. I think butyric acid, in terms of gut health and the microbiome, is something that is very important. Phosphatidylserine is a compound that helps with membranes of the brain, again, membrane enhancement and health. Uh, Glycine, I think, particular for older patients, there's no question in my mind that uh, glycine is a powerful antioxidant. It's the master antioxidant in the brain. It squelches free radicals. Oxidative stress is the probable pathogenesis of AD, PD, probably chronic traumatic encephalopathy from TBI. and N-acetylcysteine, glycine are both components of glutathione amino acids that are very helpful. Vitamin B12, depending on your age and diet. Those are a few things that I think can be important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Magnesium, of course, if you work out, in particular, if you work out a lot, magnesium glycinate or threonine, which gets through the blood-brain barrier better.
Yeah, I take most of them myself. I mean, I have my basic stack, a very potent multivitamin, very high in B vitamins. I take magnesium, and I have to balance that with a little bit of calcium just so it doesn't have its way with my gut, right? Because my bowel function, magnesium and calcium kind of balance each other out. And then, yeah, resveratrol and curcumin, a couple of these sort of natural compounds I'm a fan of, and the fish oil. So you wrote a book a long time ago on the benefits of fish oil, EPA, DHA. You still prescribe that to a lot of your patients and still advocate for higher doses of fish oil intake?
Yeah, I do. And we did actually a study. We took 250 patients with osteoarthritis, the spine, neck, and lumbar, who are on ibuprofen that kills 17,000 people a year from gastric ulceration. And we put them on 3 to 4 grams of fish oil a day, and they were able to get off of the indocin, 60% of them, as a natural anti-inflammatory rather than a toxic drug.
That's
So
cool. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I do a fair bit of work in osteoarthritis because my passion is regenerative medicine. So cellular therapies to treat joint pain and dysfunction. I had back in 2017, I set up a clinic here in Sydney using autologous adipose-derived mesenchymal stromal cells. And we would isolate those cells and grow them to high numbers and bank them for later use. So what that made possible is also repeat dosing on those patients. And the outcomes were extraordinary. But I got to tell you, Joe, 90% of the patients that were coming to the clinic to see us with osteoarthritic pain in their joints all had metabolic syndrome, right?
yeah,
So I wanted to combine these advanced regenerative medicine techniques with some form of nutritional medicine, and I couldn't find a nutritional program to support it. So, hence kind of developed my own structures to support that and reduce hyperinsulinemia. And, there's going back to um, the what happens in the brain during times of stress. I mean, there are circumstances in life that you just kind of succumb to for a period of time until you can pull yourself back. But it can often be a downward spiral because just like what you did, I'm sure when you were flipping burgers, you were probably eating them as well and drinking Coca-Cola, and you let yourself go with the diet. And last week we ran an event called Untangling Metabolic Health, and I was just sharing from the front of the room often what might be the experience for people when they're in a state of metabolic derangement, especially, let's say, for example, a woman in her late 40s, and she's tried to lose weight many times during her life, and it just gets harder and harder every time. And then they give up, and then they're hyperinsulinemic, and every hormone's got some kind of counterbalance hormone, and insulin's is glucagon. And so when your blood sugar levels go up and your pancreas releases all this insulin and it brings it right down, but it brings it down too low. And then ordinarily, glucagon would help rebalance your blood sugar levels, but glucagon's chronically suppressed because you got a chronically elevated level of insulin. So then the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that you detailed earlier kicks in, and you're in this constant fight or flight mode, which is great to get through the day. But then you get to the end of the day, you go home and you're wiped. There's nothing left in the tank. You're irritable. You're bad with the people in your life, your husband, your wife, your kids. the end of the day, your head hits the pillow, you're completely exhausted, you can't sleep properly, and all you're thinking about is tomorrow is going to be more of the same of what today was.
No, I mean, you're right. Very well put.
That chronically, that causes a bit of chaos in the brain. What happens? Does the brain just start to shut down? Does it atrophy? Do the synapses just kind of give up, or what structurally, what kind and functionally, what kind of happens?
Well, there is atrophy. The brain, the hippocampus in particular, which is the source of the repository of memory, particularly short-term memory, atrophies. So with chronic stress, there is atrophy of the brain, literally, as you said, shrinkage. So um, that means there's impaired synaptogenesis, axonogenesis. So it clearly has not only functional but structural consequences to the brain itself. Yeah.
And then there's like you lose your motivation to do anything, yeah, especially to move.
Again, when you think about brain function, you have your executive cortex, planning, anticipation, uh, impulsivity, uh, and anticipating the future. That gets messed up. You become more impulsive. You become acting out more. You become angry. You become less tolerant,
Mm.
and you're same with your salient network. What's important? What's not important? How is this particular person, thing, or place going to affect me? And then your default mode network, which is that network that gets involved just before you're ready to go into sleep. You shut down your executive cortex, your salient network, and it's a time of creativity, but also rumination. And you people who have PTSD, who have problems in their environment or with other people, ruminate before they go to sleep. It's when the other networks are, that's why it's called the default mode. You default to the executive cortex and the salient network, and uh, it can be good or bad. I have a pencil and paper by my bed because I'll get creative ideas in that space right before I go to sleep.
How
And
does tell me, how does that happen? Because sometimes when I'm struggling to figure something out, right, I'll write down like a question or something and I just put it there and I go to bed, I go to sleep. And then when I wake up and I just sit there and just kind of listen to what my brain gives me, oftentimes I've got two or three answers all of a sudden.
yeah,
How does that happen? What's going on there?
well, like I said, you're you, as you know, you have 80 to 100 billion neurons with trillions of synaptic connections, all coming together in various networks. It's called the connectome, the wiring diagram of our brain, how we're wired. Incredibly complex. It's but there are various networks, like I just outlined, that can override, supersede, take over at different times. And particularly the executive cortex, the frontal lobes, uh, they will not be operant just before you're going to sleep. They kind of shut down. So the default mode network enables you to have more creative thoughts without the baggage of the frontal lobes planning and thinking and scheming,
Constraining. Yeah.
training, and you can get some good creative thoughts. So anyway, it's incredibly complex, but it
That's
does.
amazing. Yeah. Well, I tell you, I got all fascinated with all this stuff for myself because I had a head injury. Maybe what was it now? Maybe 3 years ago, I think it was. playing martial arts. I got thrown down and I mistimed my break, right? I threw my arm down too early. And anyway, my head flops back and hits the mat really hard. And I was a bit startled in the moment, but I'm in a dojo with a lot of people and I tried to look tough and keep going. And then that night I was fine. The next day I had a bit of a headache and a sore back, and I thought, oh, maybe I'd caught a cold, right? This is 2021. I thought, we're all out and interacting. Maybe I got an infection. The morning after, I couldn't move. I woke up and I couldn't move, and I had to kind of roll myself out of bed. And so whiplash, I had a concussion. I thought, you know what, I'll be fine in maybe a couple of weeks. And it got worse and worse. Post-concussion syndrome. Uh, I found myself so lethargic, brain fog, total like insomnia, anxious, depressed, just totally exhausted. Two-dimensional spatial awareness was off. Um, just I couldn't function. And so, a mutual friend of ours, Charlie Teo, I went and saw him. His neuropsych said, Dean, this might take 18 months to recover from before you start feeling like yourself again. I'm like, 18 months? I haven't got 18 months. I'm going to hack this thing. And I'm on the phone to you straight away. And you're talking to me about hyperbaric oxygen medicine. And so I start utilizing that. And, maybe 5 months later, I was maybe 90 to 95% myself. And then that last bit took a bit longer because I started doing silly things like drinking a little bit too much alcohol when I felt better, all this sort of thing. And then I got COVID, and the infection itself wasn't much. It was very, very mild, but it was, I think, enough to trigger perhaps an inflammatory response that felt like a regression in my rehab. And that was very upsetting, and no one knew what to do. And so I thought, let me take everything that I've learned from you, everything that I'd learned from Kristen Willamere, and I put it all together. And I was in the HBot every day. I was using photobiomodulation. I was using all of the nutrient strategies that we just discussed. And that's right. You'd introduced me to the CEO of Apollo Neurosciences, who sent me a couple of devices, and I was wearing the Apollo device, and this helped me train my brain to fall asleep within 10 minutes. Completely dealt with the insomnia. Now, I used a little bit of medication in the beginning for a couple of days, weaned off that, and then the Apollo device just trained me to be able to fall asleep pretty quickly without any medication. So I did all of that. I felt myself again in 3 weeks. It was extraordinary. And then since then, I've just gone up and up in my creativity, my ability to contribute. So yeah, what you're a big fan of hyperbaric oxygen medicine these days.
I think delivered the right way and prescribed the right manner for long COVID, for post-stroke, post-concussion syndrome, PTSD. It's very valuable, but it has to be used the right way. I really enjoyed our conversation, Dee.
Yeah, I
Uh,
hope to do another one, sometime soon. There's lots more to talk about, especially in the context of the regenerative healthcare facilities that I'm putting together. And I really acknowledge the support that you're providing me in that way. And, with the team, the international team of experts, where we'll have all the cellular therapies and also the stem cell and immune cell therapies, but also the neuro healing center that I'm committed to putting together. So there will be more of that on our next chat, hopefully. But I just really, really, really appreciate the time that you've given and the generosity of everything that you contribute to people around the world.
it's a learning conversation speaking with you, and I think what you're putting together there is unique. There's no place else quite like what you're doing, putting it all together like that. So it'll be exciting to see when it's finished and congratulate you personally.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I look forward to taking a trip over to Pittsburgh and having a glass of wine with you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Bye now.